The world didn't end with a whimper. It ended with the sound of the sky shattering like glass. I remember the smell of burning ozone and the sight of my siblings falling one by one. I remember the weight of my sister Maya's hand going cold in mine as the shadows swarmed over our home. I died holding a broken blade against a god I couldn't even name, but the universe has a sick sense of humor. Or maybe it was a final mercy. I bolted upright in my bed, my lungs burning as if I had just inhaled a lungful of ash. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at my hands. They weren't covered in blood. They were clean. They were steady. I looked around the room. It was my old bedroom, the one we lived in before. The debt collectors took everything before we were forced into the slums. The smell of cheap laundry detergent and old books filled the air. It was a normal morning. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand. The date on the screen froze my blood. April 19th, 2026. This was 40 days before the Great Integration. 40 days before the sky turned red. I hadn't just survived. I had regressed. Suddenly, a blue holographic window pings into existence in front of my face, humming with a frequency only I can hear. System message, compatibility reached, time regression completed, mission, prepare the sovereign shelter, time remaining, 39 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes. A system? In my past life, I was a zero ranker. I had no special abilities, no magic, nothing. I was just a casualty. But now, as I swiped through the interface, a golden icon flashed. SSS-rank skill unlocked, gravity anchor. I felt a surge of cold energy settle into the marrow of my bones. This wasn't a dream. This was a second chance. And this time, I wasn't going to let my family die. I walked out of my room, my legs feeling like lead. In the kitchen, I saw them. Maya was sitting at the table, swinging her feet while she ate a bowl of cereal. Kyle was hunched over his laptop, probably working on a freelance coding job to help pay our rent. They were alive. They were right here. "Morning, sleepyhead," Maya chirped, her eyes bright and innocent. "You look like you saw a ghost. Did you have a nightmare?" I couldn't speak. I just walked over and hugged her so tight she gasped. She was warm. She was breathing. "Lynn, you're acting weird," Kyle said, looking up from his screen. His eyes were tired, the dark circles under them a reminder of the stress he carried at 17. "Is something wrong? Did you hear back about the job?" I pulled away from Maya and looked at them both. My expression was so grim that Kyle's hand stopped on his keyboard. "Maya, Kyle, listen to me very carefully. Everything is about to change. We aren't going to school today. We aren't going to work. We have 40 days to prepare." Kyle frowned, his analytical mind already pushing back. "Lynn, we don't have time for a prank. The debt collectors are coming at noon. Scar said if we don't have at least 50,000 of the interest today, they're tossing us out. We have to figure something out." I looked at the bank balance on my phone. $52,000. It was the last of the insurance money our parents left us after the accident. In the old timeline, I had handed it over to Scar, hoping it would buy us a few months of peace. Instead, he took the money and kicked us out anyway 2 weeks later. We were left on the streets with nothing when the monsters arrived. "Let them come, Kale," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "They aren't taking this house, and they aren't taking a single cent of our money. In fact, they're going to help us fund our survival." Kale looked at me like I was insane. "Lynn, there's 5 of them. They carry knives. Scar is a professional thug. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that the world as we know it is ending in 40 days, I said, standing tall. "The money in that bank account is useless if it's sitting in a criminal's pocket. I'm spending every bit of it on steel, solar power, and supplies. We're turning this place into a fortress." I spent the next 3 hours in a fever of activity. I didn't care about looking crazy. I logged on to industrial supply websites. I ordered 10 tons of reinforced grade A steel. I ordered high-capacity industrial solar batteries. I bought seeds, water filtration systems, and medical supplies. I watched the numbers in our bank account plummet with every click, but I felt no regret. In 40 days, money would be nothing more than colorful paper. Around 11:55 a.m., the air in the house grew heavy. I could feel it, a vibration in the ground. Or maybe it was just my gravity anchor skill reacting to the hostility approaching. A heavy, rhythmic knocking echoed through the house. It wasn't a request to enter, it was a demand. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see the silhouette of a large man with a buzz cut. Scar. "Lin, I know you're in there." Scar's voice boomed, muffled by the wood. "Open up before I break this door down and charge you an extra 10% for the labor." Maya shrank back, clutching the edge of the kitchen table. Kyle stood up, his face pale. "Lin, give them the money. Please, it's not worth it." I walked toward the door with a calm that terrified my brother. I didn't reach for my wallet. I didn't look for a weapon. I just felt the blue energy swirling in the palms of my hands. In my past life, I hid in the bathroom while they ransacked our home. I begged for mercy. Today, I opened the door with a smile. Scar stood on the porch, flanked by 4 of his men. He looked exactly as I remembered. The jagged scar over his left eye, the cheap leather jacket, the smell of stale cigarettes. He reached out to shove past me, a sneer on his face. "Move it, kid. Where's the cash?" I didn't move. I stood my ground, my eyes locking onto his. "You're early, Scar, but that's fine. I was just looking for a few test subjects." Scar laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Test subjects? What, did you finally snap? Get out of the way before I lose my patience." He reached out to grab my collar, but his hand stopped mid-air. He blinked, his face twisting in confusion. He tried to pull his arm back, but it wouldn't move. It was as if his hand was encased in lead. What are you doing?" he hissed, his eyes darting to his men. I felt the system pulse in my mind. Skill activation, gravity anchor, target identified. "I told you," I said softly, as the blue light in my eyes began to glow. "The world is changing, and you're the first one to find out how much." I flicked my wrist downward. Suddenly, the porch boards groaned under a massive, invisible weight. Scar didn't just fall, he was slammed into the wood. His knees hit the ground with a sickening crack, and his chin followed, pinning him face first to the floor. His men tried to rush forward, but as soon as they entered the 3-foot radius around me, they were crushed to their knees, gasping for air as if the atmosphere itself had turned into liquid iron. "Lin!" Kyle shouted from the kitchen, his voice cracking. "What are you doing to them?" "I'm securing our future," I replied, looking down at the pinned leader of the thugs. Scar was clawing at the porch, his face turning purple, unable to lift his head even an inch. "Now, Scar," I said, crouching down so my face was inches from his. "We're going to have a very different conversation about debt. You have a warehouse on the east side full of confiscated goods, building materials, generators, canned food. You're going to give me the keys, and then you're going to tell your boss that this house is off limits. Do we have a deal?" Scar tried to curse, but only a wheezing sound came out. I increased the pressure. The wood beneath him began to splinter. "The clock is ticking," I whispered, "and I have a lot of work to do." The silence that followed the sound of splintering wood was deafening. Kale and Maya stood frozen in the hallway, watching as 5 grown men remained pinned to our porch by an invisible force. Scar's face was pressed so hard against the floorboards that his words came out as muffled whimpers. This was the man who had haunted my nightmares for years, the man who had stripped us of our dignity in the old timeline. Now, he was nothing more than a bug under my heel. "Lin, stop it! You're going to kill them!" Kale finally found his voice, rushing forward, but stopping a safe distance away from the shimmering blue distortion in the air. I looked at my brother. In his eyes, I saw terror not of the thugs, but of me. He didn't understand yet. He didn't know that in 40 days, mercy would be a death sentence. They won't die, Kale. Not yet. But they need to understand that the old world is gone. The rules they played by don't exist anymore. I eased the pressure of the gravity anchor just enough for Scar to draw a ragged breath. The thug leader gasped, his chest heaving as he stared up at me with pupils dilated in pure, unadulterated fear. What are you? You're a monster, he wheezed. I knelt down, grabbing a handful of his hair and forcing him to look at the house he was planning to steal. I'm the person who is going to keep my family alive, and you're the person who's going to provide the supplies to do it. I reached into Scar's jacket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys and his smartphone. I used his thumb to biometric unlock the device. I ignored his personal messages and went straight to his logistics app. Scar didn't just collect debts, he managed a network of storage units, where his boss kept black market construction materials, high-end electronics, and non-perishable foods stolen from hijacked shipments. The warehouse on 4th Street, I said, scrolling through the inventory list. Unit 8B has 3 industrial-grade generators and 500 cases of canned protein. You're going to call your men at the site and tell them a delivery truck is coming to empty it out. If a single item is missing, I'll find you. And next time, I won't stop the gravity until your bones are dust. Scar nodded frantically, his bravado completely shattered. I deactivated the skill. The heavy pressure vanished instantly. The 4 henchmen scrambled backward, tripping over their own feet to get off our property. Scar stayed on the ground for a moment longer, rubbing his neck, looking at me like I was a demon wearing his younger neighbor's skin. Go, I commanded. They didn't wait for a second invitation. They piled into their black SUV and tore down the street, the tires screeching in a desperate attempt to put distance between themselves and our front porch. I turned back to my siblings. Maya was wide-eyed, her small hands clutching her yellow sweater. Kale was shaking. I walked toward them, making sure to drop the coldness from my expression. I needed to be their brother again, even if I was a soldier inside. Lynn, how did you do that? Kale asked, his voice trembling. That wasn't normal. You had blue light in your eyes. Was that a drone? Some kind of magnets? I sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for them to join me. I can't explain everything yet, Kale. If I told you the truth, you'd think I'd lost my mind. But look at the news. Look at the weird weather patterns they've been reporting in the Pacific. The auroras appearing in the middle of the day. It's starting. Cot. Kale frowned, his tech brain beginning to click. The atmospheric distortions? The scientists said it was solar flares. They're wrong, I said firmly. It's the veil thinning. In 40 days, the system will integrate with Earth. When that happens, billions of people will die in the first hour. Monsters, dungeons, and mana zones will appear where our cities used to be. The only reason I can do what I just did is because I've been chosen to prepare. We are building a sovereign shelter here. This house isn't just a home anymore. It's a bunker. Maya tilted her head. Like in the stories, Big Brother? Are we going to be superheroes? I smiled sadly and ruffled her hair. Something like that, Maya, but we have to work very hard. I need you to be my little scout. I'm going to buy a lot of supplies, and I need you to help me organize them in the basement. Can you do that? She nodded vigorously, happy to have a mission. But Kale was still skeptical. Lynn, even if I believe you, we just robbed a mob-affiliated debt collector. Scar's boss, Mr. Han, isn't going to just let this go. They'll come back with guns. Let them come, I said, opening my laptop to check the shipping status of the reinforced steel I'd ordered. By the time they gather their courage, this house will be a fortress they can't even scratch. But we can't wait here. Kale, I need you to use your coding skills. I need a private, encrypted network that doesn't rely on the local ISP. I've ordered satellite link hardware. It arrives tomorrow. I want you to build a security interface that monitors every inch of this block. Kale looked at the laptop, then at me. He saw the conviction in my eyes, a look that hadn't been there yesterday. He saw the way I handled Scar. Slowly, he reached for his computer. Fine. If you're crazy, at least you're being productive about it. I'll start on the network architecture. The rest of the day was a blur of high-intensity logistics. I rented a heavy-duty moving truck, using a fake ID I'd created, using the system's identity mask function, a minor perk of my SSS-rank status. I drove to Scar's warehouse myself. The guards there had clearly gotten the call from a terrified Scar. They didn't even look me in the eye as I backed the truck into the loading dock. I spent 6 hours loading the truck. My infinite inventory skill allowed me to touch objects and store them in a subdimensional space, but I had to be careful. I couldn't let the warehouse cameras see things just vanishing. I moved boxes manually until I was out of sight, then cleared entire shelves in seconds. By the time I finished, I had enough medical supplies to run a small clinic and enough fuel to power our house for a year. But as I was leaving, a notification flashed on my system screen. Alert. Unknown energy signature detected nearby. Type. Rift fragment. My heart skipped a beat. A rift fragment? This early? Usually, these didn't appear until a week before the integration. A fragment meant a localized tear in space where mana was leaking through, and where mana leaked, creatures followed. I parked the truck and followed the pulsing red arrow on my map. It led me to a deserted alleyway behind an old textile mill, 2 blocks from the warehouse. The air here felt static, making the hair on my arms stand up. In the center of the alley, a small, jagged crack hung in midair, glowing with a sickly violet light. And standing beneath it was something that didn't belong in 2026. It looked like a wolf, but its skin was translucent, showing glowing purple veins beneath its fur. Its eyes were vacant, white orbs, a shadow hound. It was a low-level scavenger, but for an unawakened human, it was a nightmare. The hound turned toward me, a low growl vibrating in its chest. It lunged, its claws scraping against the asphalt with a sound like metal on stone. In my past life, I would have been torn apart. This time, I didn't even flinch. Gravity anchor. Threefold, I muttered. The shadow hound slammed into the ground mid-leap. The force was so great that the asphalt cracked in a perfect circle around it. The creature yelped, its ethereal bones snapping under the pressure. I walked over to it, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. I needed the essence core inside it. Cores were the only way to upgrade the house's defenses beyond simple steel and concrete. I reached out, and as the creature dissipated into smoke, a small, glowing purple crystal fell to the ground. Item acquired. Minor rift core. Use. Upgrade. Shelter barrier. I gripped the crystal tight. This was it. The first piece of the puzzle. I hurried back to the truck. I needed to get home. If fragments were appearing now, the 40-day timeline was more fragile than I thought. When I pulled back into our driveway, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across our small lawn. I saw Kael standing by the window, his silhouette illuminated by the glow of 3 different monitors. He was working. Maya was in the yard, picking up rocks to clear the area for our fortress. They were safe. For now. But as I looked at the purple core in my hand, I knew that the peace was officially over. The thugs were the least of our problems. The real monsters were coming, and I had 39 days left to make sure that when the sky broke, my family would be the ones standing in the ruins. I walked into the house, the weight of the core heavy in my pocket. Kael, Maya, I called out. Close the curtains. We have work to do. The first upgrade starts tonight. The purple glow of the rift core illuminated our small living room, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. Kael stared at the crystal in my hand, his face pale in its unnatural light. He had spent the last few hours setting up the satellite array, but the sight of a physical object that defied every law of physics he knew finally broke his remaining skepticism. "Is that magic?" he whispered, reaching out a hand before pulling it back, afraid of being burned. "It's energy, Kael. Raw. Concentrated mana from the other side, I explained, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. In 40 days, the world will be flooded with this. It will power the lucky few and destroy everyone else. But tonight, it's going to make this house the safest place on the planet. I walked to the center of the room and knelt, placing the core on the floorboards. In my mind, I accessed the system's shelter management interface. A blueprint of our house appeared in my vision, glowing with red zones that marked our structural weaknesses. System message, minor rift core detected. Integrate with home foundation? I thought yes. The crystal shattered into 1,000 shards of light that didn't fall to the floor. Instead, they dove into the wood like liquid, spreading through the floor, up the walls, and into the ceiling. A faint, humming vibration pulsed through the house, a low frequency that made my teeth ache. Outside, the streetlights flickered and died for a block in every direction, but our house suddenly felt solid. It felt heavy, as if it had been anchored to the very bedrock of the earth. Shelter Level 1 activated. Reinforced barrier. 15% physical reduction. 5% magical resistance. What did you just do? Kale asked, running his hand over the wall. The wallpaper feels cold. Like stone. I just gave us a fighting chance, I replied. That core created a passive mana shield. If Scar comes back with a truck to ram the front door, the truck will crumple like tinfoil, and the door won't even have a scratch. But we need more. Hundreds more. The next week was a blur of calculated chaos, while the rest of the world watched the news with growing confusion, reporting mass hallucinations of strange animals and glitches in satellite feeds. Our family became a well-oiled machine. Using the supplies I'd liberated from Scar's warehouse, I tasked Kale with building the internal infrastructure. He was a genius with a soldering iron and a terminal. He spent 18 hours a day in the basement, wiring the industrial solar batteries into a localized grid. We didn't just need power for lights. I had ordered high-powered server racks. I needed Kale to scrape every bit of data from the dark web about the strange sightings worldwide. I needed to know where the rifts were opening. Maya, meanwhile, became our resident supply commander. I had used the last of our insurance money to buy 3 years' worth of dehydrated meals, vacuum-sealed grains, and medical-grade antibiotics. She took it upon herself to inventory every box, using a color-coded system of stickers. To her, it was a game. To me, it was the difference between starvation and survival. But by the 10th day, the pre-integration phase took a dark turn. I was in the garage, welding steel plates onto the frames of the windows, when Kyle burst in, his laptop in hand. His face was devoid of color. "Lynn, you need to see this. It's not just us anymore. It's everywhere." He flipped the screen. It was a live feed from a private security camera in a subway station in London. The video was grainy, but the image was clear. A jagged purple tear, much larger than the one I'd found in the alley, had opened on the platform. 3 shadow hounds had emerged, and the screams of the commuters were bone-chilling. The video cut to static, as one of the hounds lunged at the camera. "The governments are calling it localized atmospheric phenomena and animal escapes," Kale said, his voice shaking. "But the forums are losing it. People are seeing things, Lynn. Giant birds in the Midwest, liquid shadows in Tokyo, and the police, they can't kill them. Bullets just pass through some of them. Standard ammunition won't work on ethereal-type monsters," I said, putting down my welding mask. "You need mana-infused weapons, or you need to be an awakened." "Are you an awakened?" Kale asked, looking at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "I'm something else," I said, thinking of my SSS-rank REGRESSES status. "But soon, you and Maya will be too. If I can get enough cores, I can force an early awakening for both of you. You won't have to be victims this time." That night, I left the house again. I couldn't wait for rifts to open near us. I had to hunt them. I drove the truck into the industrial district, where the veil seemed to be the thinnest due to the high concentration of iron and abandoned structures. The system map was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Red dots, minor rifts, were appearing in clusters, but in the center of the shipyard, there was a pulsing gold icon. Warning. Intermediate rift detected. Class. D rank. EST. Time to breach. 15 minutes. Donna. A D rank rift. This was a jump in difficulty. Shadowhounds were E rank, basically pests. D rank meant something with intelligence, something with a hide thick enough to ignore a shotgun blast. I arrived at the shipyard just as the air began to howl. The giant shipping containers were vibrating, some of them hovering inches off the ground as the local gravity warped. In the center of the loading zone, a rift the size of a garage door was tearing open. A hand huge, gray, and tipped with obsidian claws reached through the tier. Then another. A creature pulled itself into our world. It stood 8 feet tall, a hulking mass of muscle and stone-like skin. A stone troll. Monster identified. Crag troll. Rank. D. Weakness. High-pressure impact. The troll roared, a sound that shook the windows of the nearby warehouses. It spotted my truck and picked up a rusted shipping container like it was a toy, preparing to hurl it. Gravity anchor. 5-fold, I shouted, thrusting both hands forward. The shipping container didn't fly. It suddenly weighed 10 times its original mass, snapping the troll's wrists as the creature was forced to drop it. The troll screamed in pain, but it was fast. It charged at me, its heavy feet cracking the concrete with every step. I felt the drain on my mana. At my current level, maintaining 5-fold gravity was like trying to hold back a rushing river with my bare hands. My vision blurred at the edges. I can't fail, I hissed through gritted teeth. Not while they're waiting for me at home. I shifted my stance, pulling the gravity into a single point the troll's head. Gravity well. Collapse. The air around the troll's skull imploded. There was a sound like a thunderclap, and the massive creature was driven into the ground, its head forced into the concrete by sheer, localized pressure. It struggled for a moment, its powerful limbs thrashing, before it finally went still. D-rank monster slain. Exp gained. Item acquired. Intermediate rift. Core X1. Grank mana iron. I collapsed against the side of my truck, my heart racing, sweat stinging my eyes. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I was still too weak. If one D-rank monster pushed me this hard, what would happen when the S-rank gates opened? What would happen when the gods of the system arrived? I looked at the intermediate core. It was the size of a grapefruit and pulsed with a deep, rhythmic violet light. This was enough to upgrade the shelter to level 2. It was enough to install the automated defense turrets I'd seen in the system shop. I drove back through the silent, dark streets of the city. Everything looked normal. People were sleeping in their beds, oblivious to the fact that a stone troll had almost been roaming their streets. They were living in a world that was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. The lights were off, but I could see the glow of a cigarette tip inside. Scar's boss, Mr. Han, had finally sent someone to scout us. I didn't even bother hiding. I walked to the center of the lawn, held up the glowing violet core so the people in the car could see it, and then I pointed at them. I didn't use a skill. I didn't have to. I just let the killing intent I'd honed over years of war in the previous timeline leak out for a split second. The car started instantly. It did a frantic U-turn and sped away, the tires screaming. I walked into the house. Kale was waiting behind the door with a crowbar, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "They were watching us," Kale said. "They won't be back tonight," I replied, handing him the large core. "Get this to the basement. We're upgrading the perimeter." "And Kale?" "Yeah? Tell Maya to pack a go bag for each of you. Clothes, basic tools, and the mana crackers I bought. We aren't leaving the house, but if the walls ever fail, I want you ready to move in 10 seconds. Kale looked at the glowing core, then at me. He didn't ask why. He just nodded and headed for the stairs. I stood in the dark kitchen, looking out the window at the moon. 30 days left. The peaceful preparation phase was over. The rifts were getting bigger, and the humans were getting desperate. I sat down at the table and opened the system shop. It was time to stop building a house and start building a fortress of war. System, I whispered. Show me the awakening elixir requirements. The blue screen flickered to life, showing a list of ingredients that would require me to go into the heart of the city's most dangerous zones. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. Fine, let's see who's really at the top of the food chain. The 25th day began with a sky, the color of a bruised plum. The news was no longer trying to hide the truth, they just didn't have the words for it. And they called it the global tremor, but I knew better. The veil was now so thin that the atmosphere was literally vibrating, with the friction of two worlds rubbing against each other. Inside our home, the air was thick with the hum of the Level 2 shelter. The walls were no longer just wood and plaster. They were infused with the crag troll's essence, making them harder than reinforced bunkers. KL had successfully integrated the satellite array with the system's detection grid. Our basement was now a high-tech command center, glowing with monitors that tracked every mana spike within a 5-mile radius. Lin, we have a problem, Kale called out from the monitors. He looked thinner than he had 2 weeks ago, his eyes shadowed by the weight of the data he was processing. The spikes. They aren't random anymore. They're forming a pattern, a circle. I walked over to his desk, looking at the map. He was right. 7 minor rifts had opened in the surrounding neighborhoods, forming a perfect ring around our street. This wasn't a natural breach. In my past life, I'd heard rumors of this, a guided incursion. It meant a higher-order entity on the other side was purposely thinning the veil in our specific area to create a bridgehead. They're targeting the mana signature of the house, I whispered. The core I used to upgrade the shelter. It's like a lighthouse in the dark for them. So we're a target? Maya asked, standing in the doorway clutching her go-bag. She wasn't the same carefree girl. She was disciplined now, her hazel eyes sharp and observant. We're the prize, Maya, I corrected. But they don't realize this lighthouse has teeth. I checked my status window. Level 15. Mana capacity. 450 over 450. Gravity anchor. Level 4. I was stronger, but I needed to be sure Kale and Maya could survive if I was occupied. I pulled 2 small vials from the system inventory, the awakening elixirs I had spent the last 3 nights hunting for in the city's most dangerous rift zones. They glowed with a soft golden light. Drink these, I said, handing one to each of them. It's going to hurt. Your bodies are going to feel like they're being rewritten from the inside out. But when it's over, you won't be zero rankers anymore. Kale didn't hesitate. He took the vial and downed it in one go. Maya followed his lead, her face set in a mask of bravery. For the next hour, I watched them endure the agonizing process of mana integration. Kael's skin glowed with a faint blue light, his glasses cracking as his vision was magically corrected. Maya's hair seemed to lift off her shoulders, static electricity dancing between her pigtails. Notification. Ally, awakening, complete. Kale, rank C, technomancer, locked. Maya, rank B, spirit sensitive, locked. Kale gasped for air, his eyes flying open. I can see the code, he breathed, looking at his monitors. Not just the software. I can see the flow of energy in the wires. I can move it. He waved a hand, and the power levels in the house redistributed themselves instantly, boosting the external sensors by 200%. Maya looked at her hands, confused. Everything is loud, Lin. I can hear the trees breathing, and I can hear them. They're coming. From the street. Big shadows. Suddenly, the house's perimeter alarm shrieked. Kale, status, I barked, grabbing a heavy, mana-infused spear I'd crafted from the crag troll's iron. The circle is closing, Kale shouted, his fingers flying across the keys. 4 E-rank breaches on the front lawn, 1 D-rank breach in the backyard. Lin, the D-rank. It's not a troll, it's a void weaver. My blood ran cold. Void weavers were insectoid casters. They didn't just smash things, they used magic to rot wood and corrode metal. If I let it reach the house, the level 2 barrier would dissolve, like sugar in water. Kale, stay on the monitors. Use your new skill to overclock the basement turrets I installed. Maya, go to the safe room but keep your ears open. If anything gets past the walls, scream. I sprinted to the back door, slamming it open. The backyard was unrecognizable. The air was a swirling vortex of purple mist. Emerging from a jagged tear in the center of our old garden was a creature that looked like a 6-foot-tall upright mantis, draped in tattered black robes. Its multiple eyes glowed with a hateful intelligence. Around it, smaller shadow hounds were already clawing at the shimmering blue barrier of our house. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. Gravity anchor, area effect, I roared. The shadow hounds were instantly flattened, their ethereal bodies popping under the sudden 4G pressure. But the Void Weaver was different. It raised a gnarled staff made of bone, and a wave of green, corrosive energy surged forward, clashing against my gravity field. The two powers ground against each other, throwing off sparks that set the grass on fire. The Weaver hissed, a sound that felt like a needle in my brain. It pointed its staff at me, and 3 bolts of dark shadow shot forward. I dodged the first 2, but the third grazed my shoulder. I felt a cold, numbing sensation spread instantly. Notification. Corrosion debuff detected. Health. Dropping. I ignored the pain. I couldn't afford to be defensive. I needed to end this before the Weaver called for reinforcements. Gravity well. Singularity. I poured half of my remaining mana into a single point behind the Weaver. The air collapsed inward with a violent thump. The Weaver screeched as it was sucked backward, its long, spindly limbs flailing to find purchase. As it struggled against the suction, I leapt forward, my spear glowing with blue energy. I didn't aim for the head, I aimed for the staff. If I broke its focus, the breach would collapse. The Weaver saw me coming. It let go of the staff with one hand and swiped at me with its obsidian claws. The blade tore through my hoodie, drawing blood across my chest. I felt the heat of the wound, but I didn't stop. I slammed the spear tip into the center of the bone staff. Crack! The staff exploded in a burst of jagged purple shards. The Weaver let out a final, ear-piercing wail as the mana it was channeling turned against it. The creature began to implode, its body being dragged back into the closing rift. Not today, I hissed, lunging forward one last time to grab the glowing orb in the center of the Weaver's chest before it vanished. D-rank caster slain. Item acquired. Void essence. Skill book. Mana perception. I stood in the smoldering ruins of my backyard, gasping for air, clutching the void essence. My chest was bleeding, and my arm was still numb from the shadow bolt. But as I looked up at the house, I saw the blue barrier flicker and then stabilize. Lynn, behind you, Maya's voice echoed from the house. I spun around, spear ready, but there was nothing there. Then I realized she wasn't seeing with her eyes. She was sensing through the walls. Kale, the front, I yelled. I've got it. Kale's voice came over the external speakers. I heard the high-pitched whine of the automated turrets firing. He had used his technomancy to infuse the bullets with the solar battery's electricity. Blue streaks of lightning lit up the front yard as the shadow hounds were shredded before they could even touch the porch. 5 minutes later, the silence returned. The rifts had snapped shut, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth and the smell of ozone. I walked back into the house, my legs shaking. Kale and Maya met me in the kitchen. Kale looked exhausted but exhilarated. He had just fought his first battle and won. Maya ran to me, her eyes wide as she looked at my wounds. You're hurt, she whispered, her hands glowing with a soft, warm light as she touched my arm. The numbness from the corrosion began to fade. I looked at her in shock. Maya, did you just heal me? Notification. Ally Maya has developed unique trait, spiritual harmony, healing. I sat down in one of the kitchen chairs, a heavy weight lifting off my shoulders. In my past life, they had been helpless. They had been victims. But now, my brother was a master of the house's systems, and my sister was a budding healer. We weren't just a family in hiding anymore. We were a specialized squad. We did it, Kale said, leaning against the counter. We actually held them off. This was just a probe, I said, my voice serious. I looked at the calendar on the wall. That was day 25. We have 15 days left. The entity that sent that weaver knows we're here now. They know this house is a fortress, and they won't send an insect next time. They'll send an army. I looked at the void essence on the table. Kale, we need to use this to upgrade the turrets to mana cannons. Maya, I need you to practice that healing. I'm going into the city tomorrow. I need to find the origin seed before the military seals off the downtown area. The downtown is a war zone, Lynn, Kale warned. The news says the police have retreated. Good, I said, a cold light returning to my sapphire eyes. That means no one will be in my way. We have 15 days to save this world, or at least the 5 of us in it, and I intend to spend every second of it becoming the monster that the monsters are afraid of. I looked out the window. The sky was still purple, but for the first time, the house felt truly like a sovereign shelter. We weren't just surviving, we were starting to win. Day 40 arrived not with a roar, but with a terrifying, absolute silence. The birds had stopped singing days ago. The cellular networks had finally collapsed under the weight of the encroaching mana storms. And the sky was no longer blue. It was a swirling vortex of deep crimson and obsidian black, looking like an open wound across the universe. Inside the sovereign shelter, we were ready. The house was no longer a suburban home. It was a metallic monolith. Every window was reinforced with mana iron plates, and the walls hummed with the power of the level 3 shield I had sacrificed everything to build. Kale sat in the command chair in the basement, his eyes glowing with a constant blue light as he stayed fused with the house's neural network. Maya stood beside him, her small hands resting on the main generator, her spirit harmony skill acting as a stabilizer for the massive energy output. 10 minutes, Lynn, Kale's voice echoed through the house's intercom. The atmospheric pressure is spiking. The veil is at 99% transparency. It's happening. I stood on the roof of the house, my black hoodie whipping in the unnatural wind. I looked down at our street. It was a ghost town. Most of our neighbors had fled to the government safe zones, which I knew would become death traps within the hour. Only the desperate and the brave remained. I gripped my spear, now upgraded to the gravity piercer, the 40 days of blood, sweat, and fear, all coming down to this single moment. System message. Countdown to great integration. 0 hours and 59 seconds. Kale, Maya, listen to me, I said, my voice broadcasting through their headsets. In 60 seconds, the world you knew is gone forever. Don't look at the sky. Don't listen to the voices from the rifts. Stay focused on the barrier. No matter what comes through that first wave, we do not let the shield drop. Do you understand? We're ready, big brother. Maya's voice was small, but steady. Initiating overdrive, Kale responded. I heard the high-pitched whine of the mana cannons on the roof rotating into position. The world screamed. A sound like 1,000 freight trains collided in the air above us. The red sky split open, and instead of rain, fire and shadow poured out. All over the city, massive pillars of light slammed into the ground, the spawn anchors. Suddenly, the system screen in my vision turned blood red. Notification. The great integration has begun. World status. Mana saturation. 100%. Mission. Survive the first hour. From the sky, they came. Not just shadowhounds or stone trolls, but the vanguard of the Void Army. Hundreds of winged creatures with leathery skin and glowing eyes, gargoyle raiders descended toward our neighborhood. They had sensed the high mana density of our shelter. We were the biggest target on the map. Fire, I yelled. The roof-mounted turrets erupted. Streaks of blue lightning and concentrated mana bolts tore through the air, vaporizing the lead raiders in mid-flight. But there were too many. They slammed into our barrier, their claws scraping against the shimmering blue dome with a sound that made my ears bleed. Shield integrity, 92%. Lynn, we have a heavy signature on the street, Kale shouted. It's a general class. I looked down. Emerging from a massive rift in the center of the road was a creature, 10 feet tall, encased in black plate armor, that pulsed with purple veins. It carried a two-handed mace that dripped with corrosive acid, an abyssal knight. This was a B-rank threat. In the old timeline, a creature like this could level an entire city block on its own. "I'm going down," I said, leaping from the roof. I used my gravity powers to slow my descent, landing softly on the cracked asphalt just as the knight raised its mace. "You're in the wrong neighborhood," I hissed, my sapphire eyes burning with a light that matched the blue sparks on my spear. The knight roared, a sound of pure malice, and swung the mace. I didn't dodge. I thrust my hand forward. Gravity anchor, tenfold. The mace, which should have moved with lightning speed, suddenly became an impossible weight. The knight's arms buckled as the weapon slammed into the street, shattering the concrete and sending a shockwave that cracked the nearby houses. I didn't give it a chance to recover. I blurred forward, my spear glowing with the singularity effect. I drove the tip into the gap in the knight's neck armor. The creature dissolved into black mist, leaving behind a large rift core, the very thing I needed to push our shelter to level 4. I grabbed it and looked up. The sky was filled with thousands of monsters, but our house stood like an island in a sea of chaos. But the battle wasn't just outside. "Lin! Something's inside!" Maya screamed. My heart stopped. I turned and sprinted toward the front door. KL. Status. A shadow leaper. It bypassed the physical barrier by moving through the electrical lines. Kale's voice was panicked. "It's in the basement. I can't leave the controls." I burst through the front door, my gravity powers flaring. I reached the basement stairs in 3 strides. In the dim blue light of the server room, a lithe, shadowy figure was poised to strike at Maya. It was a void assassin, fast, lethal, and invisible to normal eyes. But Maya wasn't normal anymore. As the assassin lunged, Maya didn't flinch. She threw her hands out, and a burst of pure golden light erupted from her palms. "Get away from my brother!" The light hit the shadow creature like a physical blow, pinning it against the wall and forcing it into a visible, solid form. It hissed in agony as the holy attribute mana burned its skin. Kale didn't miss the opening. He pointed his hand at a nearby power conduit. "Overload!" A bolt of electricity shot from the wall, striking the pinned assassin and finishing it off in a shower of sparks. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, spear in hand, watching my younger siblings. They were breathing hard, their faces pale, but they were standing. They had defended themselves. They weren't the children I had lost in the previous life. They were warriors. I walked over and put my hands on their shoulders. "You did it. You both did it." We went back up to the living room and looked through the reinforced viewports. The first hour of the integration was almost over. The initial wave of monsters had been thinned out, but the world outside was unrecognizable. Fires burned in the distance, and the sound of distant sirens was slowly being replaced by the roars of creatures that now ruled the earth. I looked at the system screen. Mission complete. Survive the first hour. Reward. Sovereign title unlocked. Base level increased. New mission. Expand the domain. I looked at Kale and Maya. We were safe, for now. Our debt was gone, the thugs were a memory, and the court that was going to seize our home didn't exist anymore. But a new world had begun, a world where only the strong survived. "We have enough food for a year," Kale said, looking at the inventory. "But the grid is gone. The internet is gone. We're alone." "We aren't alone," I said, looking out at the ruined street. I saw a light flickering in a neighbor's window. Someone had survived the first wave. "We have the sovereign shelter. Lone. And we have each other." This was just the first 40 days. Now, we start the real work. I walked to the front door and opened it. The air smelled of ash and manna. I looked up at the red sky and held my spear high. "My name is Lin," I whispered, though I knew the system could hear me. "I am a regressor, a protector, and the lord of this house. To anyone still alive, if you can hear this, find the blue light in the dark. Find the sovereign shelter. We are just getting started." The world outside the sovereign shelter was no longer the world I remembered. The red sky hadn't faded after the first hour. It had settled into a deep, pulsating crimson that made every shadow look like a living thing. Standing on my porch, the sovereign title felt heavy, a golden weight pressed against my soul that hummed whenever I looked at the ruined houses lining our street. I could feel the boundaries of my domain, a shimmering blue grid that extended 50 feet in every direction, vibrating with the power of the Level 3 shield. Inside, we were an island of order. Outside, the Great Integration had turned the city into a meat grinder. The distant sound of screams was being replaced by something worse, the rhythmic, mechanical thud of spawn anchors hitting the earth. I turned back to the door, the air inside the house smelling of ozone and the vegetable soup Maya had insisted on making despite the chaos. It was a domestic smell that felt like a sin in a world that was currently burning. Kale was still hunched over his monitors in the basement, but he had moved a second terminal up to the kitchen table so he could eat while he worked. His eyes, once tired and strained, were now sharp with the blue light of a technomancer. He didn't look like a 17-year-old kid anymore. He looked like a general coordinating a battlefield. "Lin, you need to see the long-range scans," Kale said, his voice dropping the hesitation it had held for years. He swiped his hand across the air, and a holographic map of the tri-state area projected over our dinner table. "The government's safe zones are collapsing. I'm intercepting emergency broadcasts from the stadium downtown. They didn't account for the ethereal-type monsters. Bullets are useless, and the panic is doing more damage than the monsters." I looked at the map. A massive red heat signature was centered over the city's heart. "The hive mind," I whispered. In my past life, the downtown area had become a no-go zone within the first 3 days. The Humanity Reconstruction Front, the military remnant that would eventually become our greatest human enemy, was currently trying to evacuate the elite while leaving the rest of the city to rot. "Kale, can you track the HRF frequencies?" I asked, my fingers tracing the glowing lines of the map. "Already on it," he replied. "They're calling themselves the Protectors on the public channels, but their internal comms are all about asset recovery. They aren't looking for survivors, Lin. They're looking for the origin seeds. They know that whoever controls the mana wells controls the new world." A new notification pinged in my vision, glowing with a sharp, silver light. "Sovereign Quest. The First Colony. Objective: rescue 5 survivors and integrate them into the shelter. Reward: domain expansion." I looked at Maya, who was cleaning a medical kit nearby. She looked at me, her spirit-sensitive ears twitching. "There's someone close, isn't there?" she asked. "I can hear a heartbeat. It's fast, terrified. It's coming from the Miller house, 2 doors down." The Miller house. They were an elderly couple who had lived there since before our parents died. In the old timeline, they were among the first to be taken by the Shadowhounds. I wouldn't let that happen again. I gripped the gravity piercer, the cold iron of the spear grounding me. "Kale, keep the turrets on standby. If anything larger than a hound enters the 50-foot perimeter, vaporize it. Maya, stay in the kitchen and keep the healing light ready. I'm going out." I stepped off the porch. The moment I crossed the blue boundary of the shield, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The air was thick with mana rot, a black, soot-like substance that fell from the red sky. I activated mana perception, a skill I'd ripped from the Void Weaver's corpse. The world shifted into a spectrum of grays and purples. I could see the mana flowing like veins through the earth, and right now, those veins were being choked. I moved with a silent, predatory grace. Level 15 had changed my physiology. I was faster, stronger, and my footsteps made no sound on the cracked asphalt. As I approached the Miller house, I saw the front door had been ripped off its hinges, not broken, melted. Monster identified, acid spitter. Rank, E+. 3 of them were clinging to the ceiling of the Miller's porch like overgrown, translucent leeches. They were dripping green fluid that hissed as it ate through the wood. Inside the house, I heard a muffled sob. "Gravity anchor." "Vertical," I muttered, flicking my wrist. The gravity in a 10-foot square around the porch suddenly inverted. The three leeches weren't expecting the world to pull them upward. They were slammed into the porch roof with the force of a falling car. Before they could recover, I lunged. The gravity piercer lived up to its name. I didn't just stab them. I used the spear as a conduit for a localized singularity. Each thrust ended in a muffled pop as the monster's internal organs collapsed under 10 times the atmospheric pressure. I stepped into the house. Mr. Miller was standing in the hallway, clutching a rusted gardening hoe, shielding his wife who was curled on the floor. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. He didn't see the neighbor kid who used to mow his lawn. He saw a silhouette in a black hoodie with eyes that glowed like sapphire fire. "Lynn, is that you?" His voice trembled. "Mr. Miller, don't talk. Just move," I said, my voice vibrating with the Sovereign's command trait. "Follow my footsteps. Don't look at the sky, and don't stop until you cross the blue light in my yard." I escorted them out. On the street, a pack of shadow hounds began to circle us, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. They sensed the sovereign essence on me and hesitated, their primal instincts warring with their hunger. "Tenfold," I whispered, slamming the butt of my spear into the ground. A shockwave of gravity rippled outward, flattening the asphalt in a perfect circle. The hounds didn't just fall, they were crushed into the ground, their ethereal bones snapping like dry twigs. I didn't even look back to see them dissipate into smoke. I marched the Millers across the boundary. The moment they stepped into the blue light, the system chimed. Survivors rescued, 2/5. Shelter population, 5/10. Occupancy warning. Resources must be managed. Oak. Kale met us at the door, helping the elderly couple into the living room. Maya immediately began chanting, a soft golden warmth filling the room as she healed the chemical burns on Mr. Miller's arms. "They're safe," I said, but my eyes were already back on the monitors. "Kale, we have 3 more to find, but we have a bigger problem. Look at the drones." Kale brought up the feed from a hidden camera I'd placed on the water tower a mile away. A convoy of armored vehicles was moving toward our suburb. They weren't flying the national flag. They were flying a white circle with a red fist, the symbol of the Humanity Reconstruction Front. "Vance," I spat. "General Vance." In my past life, he was the man who had ordered the purging of non-awakened sectors to save Manacores for his elite guard. He was a hero to the history books, but a butcher to those who lived in the slums. He wasn't here to save our neighborhood. He was following the mana signature of my level 3 shelter. To him, our house wasn't a home. It was a power source. "They'll be here in an hour," Kale said, his hands shaking slightly. "Lynn, they have tanks. Those are mana-infused shells. Our shield is rank 3, but a sustained bombardment from the HRF will crack it." "Then we don't let them start the bombardment," I said. I looked at my status window. I had 200 mana points left. It wasn't enough for a full-scale war, but it was enough for a message. "Kale, I need you to use the identity mask function to broadcast a message to their lead vehicle. Tell them they are entering a sovereign zone. Tell them that any act of aggression will be met with immediate gravitational collapse." "They won't listen, Lynn," Kale warned. "Vance thinks he's the new god of this world." "Then I'll show him what a real god looks like," I replied. I walked to the basement and opened the Sovereign Armory. Inside were the items I had hoarded, the G-rank mana iron, the void essence, and a rare item I hadn't used yet, the Anchor of the Fallen. It was a heavy, black chain that pulsed with the weight of 1,000 dying stars. It was an S-rank artifact, and using it would drain my mana to 0 in seconds. But it would also turn our 50-foot yard into a localized black hole for anything I deemed a threat. "Maya, Kale," I called them both to the center of the room. I took their hands. "The next few hours are going to be the hardest of our lives. We aren't just fighting monsters anymore. We're fighting the greed of the old world. If the shield starts to flicker, Maya, you pour every bit of your spirit energy into the core. Kyle, you keep those turrets firing until the barrels melt. Do you trust me?" "With our lives, Lynn," Kale said. Maya just squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with tears but her jaw set in a hard line. We're a squad, remember? We don't lose. I went back to the roof. The HRF convoy was visible now, their headlights cutting through the red mist like the eyes of a predator. I could hear the rumble of the engines. They stopped exactly at the edge of our block. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, amplified by Mana. "This is General Vance of the Humanity Reconstruction Front. By the authority of the Emergency Governance Act, this structure and its resources are now property of the state. Surrender the Mana Core and step outside with your hands up, or we will commence fire." I stood on the edge of the roof, the gravity piercer glowing a lethal deep blue. I didn't use a loudspeaker. I used my sovereign's voice. "This is Lynn Penhaligon," I roared, the sound vibrating the windows of every house on the street. "There is no state. There is only the sovereign. If you take one more step into this zone, you won't be surrendering to the law. You'll be surrendering to the earth." The lead tank didn't hesitate. The turret rotated, the barrel glowing with an orange light as it charged a mana shell. "Fire!" Vance's voice commanded. The shell screamed toward our house, a ball of concentrated destruction. Kale's shield flared, a brilliant blue dome appearing to meet the blast. The collision shook the ground, the sound of the explosion deafening. Shield integrity, 85%. "My turn," I whispered. I threw the anchor of the fallen into the air. It didn't fall. It hovered above my head, the black chains unfurling like the wings of a dark angel. I channeled every drop of my mana into the artifact. Gravity domain. Absolute zero. The world turned black and white. For the soldiers in the convoy, the world suddenly became 10,000 times heavier. The armored vehicles didn't just stop. They were crushed into the asphalt. The tank that had fired on us folded in on itself like a tin can, the metal screaming as it was compressed by an invisible hand. The soldiers inside didn't even have time to scream. Vance's command vehicle, reinforced with S-rank shielding, was the only thing left standing, but even it was buried up to its axles in the shattered road. I stood on my roof, gasping for air, my mana pool blinking red at 0/450. I was weak, my vision swimming, but I held the spear high. "Who's next?" I wheezed. The silence that followed was absolute. The HRF, the most powerful human force on the planet, had just lost an entire vanguard to a single kid on a suburban roof. Sovereign title bonus. Infamy gained. Klee. New title unlocked. The Butcher of the Block. I collapsed onto the shingles, my heart hammering. I had won the first battle of the Colony War, but I knew this was just the beginning. Vance would be back with an army. The monsters would be back with a hive mind, and I only had 38 days of preparation left. The morning air was thick with the smell of ozone and the heavy, metallic scent of the anchor of the fallen that still hung over our yard. My mana was recovering slowly, ticking up point by painful point, but my body felt like it had been put through a hydraulic press. I sat on the edge of the roof, watching the smoke rise from the crushed remains of the HRF Vanguard. General Vance's command vehicle was gone, retreated into the red mist the moment the gravitational field deactivated, but I knew he hadn't gone far. He was a man who measured the world in assets, and my home was currently the most valuable asset on the map. Notification: mana recovery at 40%. System warning: large-scale mana disturbance detected in Sector 4. Lynn, you need to get down here. KL's voice cracked through my earpiece, sharp with a new kind of tension. The Millers are stable, but we have a situation at the perimeter. A new group. They aren't military. I hopped down from the roof, my boots hitting the cracked driveway with a heavy thud. Standing at the edge of the shimmering blue shield were 3 figures. They weren't wearing the polished white armor of the HRF. They were dressed in scavenged tactical gear, their faces hidden behind gas masks and hooded cloaks. The one in the center held a flickering flare, the red light casting long, jagged shadows across the street. "We don't want trouble," the leader shouted, his voice muffled by the mask. He raised his hands, showing they were empty, but I could see the faint glow of mana veins pulsing on his neck. He was an awakened, likely a rank E or D. "We saw what you did to the tanks. We're from the apartment complex 3 blocks over. There are 50 of us trapped in the basement. The hounds. They've stopped hunting. They're waiting for something bigger. I stepped to the very edge of the shield, the gravity piercer held loosely in my hand. Why come here? I asked, my voice amplified by the sovereign's presence. Because you're the only blue light left, the man said, gesturing to the sky. Everywhere else the red vortex was suffocating, but above our house, the air was almost clear. The government zones turned into slaughterhouses. They locked the gates once they hit capacity. We heard the broadcast. You said this was a sovereign zone. Does that mean you protect your own, or are you just another warlord? New mission, the refugee dilemma. Choice A, protect. Integrate the 50 survivors. Reward, massive XP, domain level up. Choice B, reject. Secure your resources. Reward, enhanced shield fortification. In my previous life, I would have hesitated. I would have thought about the food, the water, and the risk of a traitor in our midst. But I remembered the faces of the people I couldn't save 40 days before the regression. If I wanted to be a sovereign, I couldn't just rule a house. I had to rule a people. Bring them, I said, but tell them this. Inside this light, you follow my rules, you work, you defend, and you contribute. The first person to steal or cause a rift gets thrown to the hounds. Do you understand? The man nodded frantically and sprinted back into the mist. I turned to see Kale and Maya standing on the porch. Kale looked worried, his eyes darting to our inventory screens. 50 people, Lynn. We have food for a year for the 3 of us, but 50. That drops to weeks. Then we expand the garden, Maya said, her voice surprisingly firm. She walked to the center of the yard, where the level 3 shield met the soil. She knelt, her hands glowing with a soft, vibrant green. The mana density here is high enough. If I use my spirit harmony, I can force the seeds to mature in days, not months. But I need more spirit dust from the rift. I'll get it for you, I promised. But I knew the survivors weren't the only thing coming. An hour later, a ragtag procession emerged from the fog. Men, women, and children, clutching whatever they could carry. They looked at the metallic monolith of our home with a mixture of terror and hope. As they crossed the shield, I felt the system hum. Survivors rescued, 52 over 50. Objective complete. Reward, domain expansion initiated. The blue border of our shield began to push outward. It didn't just grow, it moved with a violent force, shunting the wrecked HRF vehicles and the corpses of shadowhounds out of its path. The shimmering dome expanded, swallowing the next 4 houses on the block and the small community park across the street. The metallic iron plating on our house groaned as it extended its roots mana conductors that tunneled into the neighboring basements, linking the structures together. Kale, sync the new grid, I yelled over the sound of grinding metal. I'm on it, hacking the local power junctions. I'm turning the neighboring houses into auxiliary batteries. Kale's fingers moved like a blur. Lynn, the shield just tripled in surface area. Our energy consumption is spiking. We need a core upgrade fast. As the survivors settled into the newly annexed houses, the peace lasted only minutes. A low, vibrating roar shook the windows, a sound that didn't come from the sky, but from the earth. Lynn, the street! Maya screamed, pointing toward the community park we had just integrated. The ground in the center of the park split open. This wasn't a spawn anchor. It was a subterranean breach. From the darkness of the pit, hundreds of stone trolls began to crawl out rank D monsters, with skin like granite and eyes that glowed with a hungry yellow light. They weren't interested in the people. They were attracted to the high-density mana of the sovereign shield. They're trying to eat the shield from the inside, Kale shouted. If they drain the perimeter, the whole dome collapses. Survivors, get into the basements now, I roared. I didn't wait for them to move. I leaped from the porch, clearing 30 feet in a single bound. I landed in the middle of the troll swarm. The first one swung a massive, rocky fist that could have leveled a wall. I didn't dodge. I raised the gravity piercer and activated Singularity. The tip of my spear became a point of infinite weight. When the troll's fist hit the spear, The monster's entire arm collapsed into itself, pulverized by the sheer force of the gravity well. Tenfold, I slammed the spear into the ground. The stone trolls within a 20-yard radius were pinned to the earth, the grass turning black as the soil was compacted under the pressure. But there were too many. For every 10 I crushed, 20 more crawled out of the breach. They began to climb the neighboring houses, their claws tearing through the siding. "Maya, now!" I signaled. Maya stood on the roof, her arms outstretched. Spirit flare, purge. A wave of brilliant green light erupted from her, washing over the park. It didn't hurt the trolls, but it acted like a beacon. The nature spirits that lived in the park's old oak trees dormant since the integration began suddenly woke up. The tree roots surged from the ground like giant snakes, wrapping around the stone trolls and dragging them back into the abyss. Kale, the turrets. The roof-mounted mana cannons rotated downward, firing concentrated blue bolts into the breach. The explosion of mana triggered a secondary collapse, sealing the hole and burying the remaining trolls under tons of rock. I stood in the center of the park, my chest heaving, covered in stone dust and black ichor. The survivors were peeking out of the windows, watching me with wide, disbelieving eyes. To them, I wasn't just a protector anymore. I was something terrifying. Mission complete. Defend the colony. XP gained. Level up. 18. New skill unlocked. Sovereign's Call allows the user to temporarily buff the stats of all allies within the domain. I walked back toward our house, the survivors parting like the Red Sea as I approached. The man with the gas mask, the leader, stepped forward. He removed his mask, revealing a face scarred by the early hours of the apocalypse. "My name is Sarah," she said, surprising me. "I was a structural engineer before the sky turned red. If you're going to build a colony, you're going to need walls that don't just rely on magic. Give me the materials, and I'll turn this block into a fortress." I looked at her, then at the notification on my screen. Ally recruited. The engineer. "Kale, give her access to the level 1 blueprints," I said, finally feeling the weight of the day. "Maya, start the spirit garden. We have 55 mouths to feed, and the HRF is going to be back with more than just one tank next time." I walked into the basement and sat in the dark for a moment. My hands were shaking. In the old timeline, I was a coward who died in a ditch. Now, I was responsible for a city block of lives. I opened the system shop and looked at the world ranking board. Rank 1, the Sovereign Sector 4, 18,500 points. Rank 2, the General Sector 1, 14,200 points. Vance was right behind me. He wasn't just a military leader, he was a player in the system too, and he was hunting for the top spot. "Kale," I called out into the quiet of the basement. "How long until the next integration wave?" "The timer just reset, Lynn." Kale's voice came back, grim and steady. "Wave 2 starts in 6 hours, and this time, the system is labeling it the Great Feast." I gripped the gravity piercer, the blue sparks dancing along the blade. "Let them come. This is no longer a house. This is the sovereign colony, and we don't feed the monsters." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I could hear the world outside screaming, but inside the blue light, for the first time in 2 lives, I felt like I was the one holding the pen. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, thick with the weight of the 5,000 souls now sleeping under the shimmering blue dome of our expanded territory. I spent those 6 hours not in rest, but in a cold, methodical trance. I walked the new perimeter of the sovereign colony, my boots crunching on the glass and debris that defined the line between civilization and the abyss. The expanded shield now covered 3 full city blocks, anchoring into the foundations of apartment complexes and local shops. It was no longer just a house. It was a fortress, a localized defiance of the apocalypse. In the basement, Kale was a ghost in the machine. His fingers moved across holographic interfaces with a speed that blurred the line between human and data. He wasn't just tracking monsters anymore. He was rewriting the colony's power grid. "Lynn," his voice crackled through my earpiece. "I've rerouted the mana flow from the auxiliary basement generators. If the shield takes a direct hit from a rank B or higher, the feedback won't fry the internal circuits. But we're burning through the monster cores we looted from the stone trolls at a terrifying rate. We need a more sustainable source, or the great feast is going to be our funeral. I stopped at the edge of the park, looking at the dark pit where the subterranean breach had occurred. The system doesn't give anything for free, Kale. If it's labeling this wave the Great Feast, it means the monsters aren't coming to destroy, they're coming to harvest. Notification: Wave 2 commencing in 0 hours 5 minutes. Title: The Great Feast. Warning: high-density mana signatures detected above Sector 4. The red sky above us didn't just swirl, it began to thicken into a viscous, blood-colored cloud. I looked up and saw them. They weren't land dwellers. Thousands of ether ray flyers, translucent and jagged like shards of broken glass, began to descend from the vortex. They didn't roar. They emitted a high-frequency hum that made the teeth of every survivor in the colony ache. Behind them, tethered by umbilical cords of pure energy, were the harvester's colossal, multi-limbed monstrosities that looked like a cross between an industrial crane and an organic spider. "Maya, position," I barked. Maya appeared on the balcony of the central apartment complex, her white robes billowing in the sudden, unnatural wind. Her eyes were already glowing, with a soft, vibrant silver. "The spirits are terrified, Lin. These things, they don't eat flesh, they eat the spirit essence. If they touch the survivors, they won't just kill them, they'll erase them." "Not on my watch," I whispered. I raised the gravity piercer, the blue sparks intensifying until the spear looked like a bolt of captured lightning. "Kale, activate the localized gravity nets we installed on the rooftops. Ground the small ones. I'll handle the harvesters." The timer hit 0. The high-frequency hum shifted into a piercing shriek as the ether rays dived. They slammed into the blue shield like rain on a windshield, but instead of bouncing off, they began to vibrate, their bodies acting as tuning forks to destabilize the mana frequency of our protection. Shield integrity: 94%, 91%, 88%. "They're vibrating through the shield," Kale yelled. "Lin, the frequency is too high. I can't compensate." "Gravity anchor, 5-fold." I lunged into the air, using a localized gravity pulse beneath my feet to propel myself toward the first harvester. As I soared through the crimson mist, the world slowed down. I could see the panic in the windows of the houses below the survivors, huddled together, watching the sky fall. I felt the sovereign title pulse in my chest, a golden heat that demanded I be more than a man. I wasn't just Lin anymore. I was the weight of their world. I reached the first harvester, a creature the size of a small cargo ship. Its long, spindly limbs were reaching down, trying to pierce the shield with needles made of solidified mana. I didn't just strike at it. I became a gravitational singularity. Singularity point. Core. I drove the spear into the center of the harvester's bloated body. Instead of blood, a torrent of raw, unrefined mana erupted. I didn't let it dissipate. I used gravity manipulation to coil the energy around the spear, turning the monster's own essence into a weapon. The harvester began to collapse inward, its massive limbs snapping like dry twigs as it was crushed by its own mass. XP gained, mana replenished by 15% sovereign siphon. But there were 4 more harvesters, and thousands of ether rays were now slipping through the micro-fractures in the shield. I saw a group of rays diving toward the miller's house. "Maya, protect the residential block." "Spirit Aegis, Emerald Forest." Maya slammed her palms together. From the soil of the colony, massive vines made of translucent green light erupted, weaving together to form a secondary, organic shield beneath the mana dome. The ether rays that touched the vines were instantly entangled, their energy being drained by the spirits Maya commanded. I moved like a shadow between the harvesters, my body a blur of blue and black. I was burning through my mana pool, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every thrust of the spear was a calculated strike, collapsing the lungs of the monsters and sending their shriveled husks crashing into the dead zone outside our perimeter. Then, the ground shook. A massive armored transport vehicle marked with the HRF fist burst through the ruins of a nearby shop, entering the sovereign zone from the flank. They weren't here to help. They were here while we were distracted. Lin, the HRF. Kale's voice was frantic. They're using a mana nullifier. They're trying to kill our internal power while the shield is under stress. I landed on the roof of the transport, my weight alone caving in the reinforced steel. I didn't use the spear. I used my bare hands, wreathed in the dark purple glow of crushing pressure. I tore the roof open like a tin can. Inside weren't just soldiers. They were inquisitors, awakened humans, whose only job was to hunt other awakened. You chose the wrong day to play scavenger, I hissed. The lead inquisitor raised a hand, a pulse of anti-mana rippling toward me. It should have neutralized my powers. It would have neutralized any normal ranker. But I was a regressor with a sovereign soul. My power didn't come from the system's local mana. It came from the weight of my second life. I caught the pulse in my palm and crushed it. My gravity doesn't follow your rules. I increased the pressure inside the transport to 20 times the Earth's gravity. The Inquisitors didn't even have time to scream as they were flattened into the floorboards, their armor fusing with their skin. I grabbed the mana nullifier device, a glowing silver orb, and looked at it. Kael, can you use this? I shouted into the comms. If you get it to me, I can reverse the polarity. We can use it to scramble the ether ray's frequency. I threw the device toward the basement entrance, using a gravitational tether to guide it safely into Kael's waiting hands. Do it now. The shield is at 12%. I turned my attention back to the sky. The final harvester was hovering directly over our central house, over Kael and Maya. It had gathered a massive sphere of red energy, preparing to fire a calamity beam that would vaporize everything within the dome. I felt a cold shiver of rage. In my first life, I had watched my family die because I was too weak to move. Now, I was the strongest thing in this city. Sovereign skill, world weight. This was a skill I had been saving, a move that drained my health along with my mana. My skin began to crack, blue light leaking from my pores. I became a pillar of pure, unadulterated mass. I didn't jump. I warped space to appear directly in front of the harvester's maw. Eat this, I growled. I drove the spear into the glowing sphere of energy. Instead of an explosion, there was a silent, terrifying implosion. I forced the gravity of the entire block to center on the tip of my spear. The harvester, the ether rays, and even the red mist were sucked into a tiny pinpoint of black light. Then, Kael triggered the nullifier. A white pulse of static rippled outward from our basement, hitting the remaining flyers. Their translucent bodies shattered like glass, falling to the earth in a harmless rain of glittering dust. The silence that followed was deafening. I fell from the sky, my mana at 0/600 and my health at 15%. I crashed through the roof of our porch, landing hard on the wooden floorboards. My spear clattered away, its light fading to a dull gray. Maya rushed to me, her hands already glowing with healing warmth. Lin! Stay with me! I looked up at her, my vision blurring. The red sky was still there, but the great feast was over. The colony had survived. Wave 2 survived. Reward: Sovereign level 25, unlocked. Colony population 5,102. Status: Infamy, SSS-rank. I felt the survivors stepping out of their shelters. They didn't cheer. They stood in the streets, looking at the broken HRF transport and the dust of the monsters, and then they looked at our house. They saw the blood on the porch. They saw the cost of their safety. Kael, I wheezed as he ran up from the basement. The HRF. They'll send more than a transport next time. They know we have the nullifier now. Let them, Kael said, his face set in a grim mask of determination. I've mapped their frequencies. They can't hide from us anymore. I closed my eyes as Maya's healing light began to knit my skin back together. We had won the battle, but the colony war was just entering its most dangerous phase. General Vance wasn't just an enemy anymore. He was a rival sovereign, and he had just seen exactly what I was capable of. Maya, I whispered, tell the people to start building. The walls need to be higher. The next wave won't be a feast. It'll be a famine. I passed out then, the sound of the colony's first communal construction project, the sound of hammers on stone acting as my lullaby. We were no longer just survivors. We were a nation in the making, and the world was finally starting to fear the blue light in the dark. I didn't wake up to the sound of birds. I woke up to the sound of jackhammers and the low, rhythmic chanting of 1,000 people working in unison. My mana had trickled back to 80%, but my muscles still screamed from the world weight skill I'd pulled off during the Great Feast. I stood on the balcony of the central apartment complex, looking down at the sovereign colony. In just 48 hours, the street had transformed. Sarah, the engineer, was a woman of her word. The debris from the HRF transport had been melted down and reforged into spiked barricades, and the perimeter houses were being reinforced with a mixture of concrete and mana iron. The survivors weren't just huddling in corners anymore. They were organized. Men and women were hauling stones, while others were sharpening scavenged metal into spears. Maya was in the center of the park, her hands pressed against the earth as she led a group of children in spirit planting, turning the gray soil into a lush, green carpet of mana-rich crops that could feed a small army. We were building a civilization in the middle of a graveyard, but the red sky was pulsing with a deeper, angrier hue. "Lynn, we have a problem that walls can't fix," Kale's voice came through the comms, sounding more like a data stream than a human. I looked toward the basement entrance and saw him walking out, squinting against the harsh crimson light. He held a tablet that was overflowing with red warning icons. The HRF didn't retreat to a base. They've set up a blockade 3 miles out. They're stopping any supplies from reaching Sector 4. They're trying to starve us out before the next wave hits. But that's not the worst part. He swiped the screen, and a grainy satellite image appeared. It showed a massive movement in the city center. The ruins of the skyscrapers weren't just falling. They were being pulled toward a central point. The hive mind is maturing. The system is concentrating all the Rank A and Rank B monsters into a single tidal wave. If that wave hits us while Vance has us blockaded, we'll be crushed between a hammer and an anvil. Vance doesn't want to destroy us yet, I said, my voice cold. He wants us to beg for his help so he can walk in here as a savior and take the core. He's playing the long game. Notification. Sovereign quest. Break the siege. Objective. Destroy the HRF blockade and secure the northern supply route. Reward. Access to the black market shop, Rank B blueprints. Failure. Colony morale collapse. Resource depletion. I looked at my status. Level 25. I was the strongest human in this sector, but I couldn't be everywhere at once. I needed to show the HRF that the Sovereign didn't just defend, he hunted. Kyle, can you pinpoint the location of their command tent at the blockade? It's at the old bridge. They've got 2 Sentinel mechs and a battery of mana cannons aimed right at the only road out of here. If you move, they'll see you the moment you cross the 3-mile mark. Then I won't move on the road, I replied. I looked at the anchor of the fallen chain coiled on the floor. Maya, I need a spirit concealment. Can you hide me from their sensors for 20 minutes? Maya looked up from the garden, her face pale with exhaustion. 20 minutes is all I have left, Lynn. The spirits are tired. If I do this, I won't be able to help with the crops for 2 days. Do it. If we don't break this blockade, those crops won't matter. Maya walked to me and placed her hand on my chest. A cool, misty green energy washed over me, blurring my edges until I looked like a smudge in the air. I felt weightless, my mana signature suppressed to the level of a common rabbit. I didn't take a car. I didn't even take the street. I moved through the ruins of the office buildings, jumping from rooftop to rooftop with gravitational pulses that made no sound. The city was a ghost town, filled with the husks of cars and the occasional screech of a scavenger monster that didn't even notice me passing by. I reached the bridge in 15 minutes. Kale was right. The HRF had turned the bridge into a fortress. 2 massive 10-foot-tall Sentinel mechs stood at the center, their blue optics scanning the mist. Soldiers in high-grade tactical gear were patrolling the perimeter, and in the center of the camp was a large, white command tent reinforced with mana shielding. I saw him then, General Vance. He was standing outside the tent, looking at a map. He wasn't the monster I remembered from the first timeline. He looked like a tired man trying to save a world that was already dead. But I knew better. I knew the order he wanted was a cage for anyone who wasn't an awakened elite. Kale, I'm in position. Cut their communications. Now. Initiating signal jamming. You have 60 seconds before their backup generators kick in. Go. I deactivated the concealment and slammed into the center of the camp like a meteor. Gravity anchor, tenfold. The shockwave didn't just push the soldiers back. It flattened the tents and sent the mana cannons tumbling into the river below. The two sentinel mechs turned, their chain guns spinning up, but I was already moving. I lunged at the first mech, the gravity piercer glowing with an unstable violet light. I didn't strike the armor. I struck the air in front of it. Localized. Singularity. The mech's right arm was sucked into the void, the heavy metal shrieking as it was twisted like a wet rag. The machine tipped over, its hydraulics spraying oil across the pavement. The second mech fired, a hail of mana-infused bullets tearing through the air. But I raised my hand, creating a gravity wall that stopped the bullets mid-air, suspending them in a shimmering grid. Return to sender, I growled, flicking my wrist. The bullets reversed direction, propelled by my own mana. They tore through the second mech's optics, blinding it. I didn't stop to finish it. I walked toward Vance. The general didn't run. He pulled a heavy sidearm, a Ranker Sunbolt pistol, and aimed it at my head. "You're a fool, Penhaligon," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "You're protecting a bunch of useless mouths. You're wasting the most powerful mana core in the city on civilians who can't fight. Join us. We can stabilize the entire state in a month if we combine our resources." "The people aren't resources, Vance," I said, stepping closer. The gravity around me was so intense that the concrete beneath my boots was turning to powder. "They're the reason we're fighting. If you want my core, you have to earn it. And so far, all you've done is hide behind mechs and starve children." Vance fired. The Sunbolt was a white-hot spear of light designed to pierce S-rank shields. I didn't dodge. I caught the bolt in my bare hand, the heat searing my palm, but I didn't let go. I crushed the light in my fist, the sparks dying out against my skin. "My world doesn't have room for a general," I said. I grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. I could have ended it right there. I could have crushed his windpipe and ended the HRF's leadership in a second. But a new notification appeared in my vision, glowing with a dark, oily gold. Hidden event, the fate of the rival. If Vance dies, the HRF collapses into ravaging warbands. Colony threat increases by 200%. If Vance lives, the blockade is lifted, but the civil war continues. The system was rigged. It wanted the war to continue. It thrived on the conflict between us. I looked into Vance's eyes. There was no fear there, only a cold, calculating resolve. He knew I wouldn't kill him if I saw the consequences. "You think you're in control, don't you?" I whispered to him. "You think the system is your ally?" I threw him back against the ruined command tent. "The blockade ends today, Vance. Tell your men to pull back to the city limits. If I see a single HRF soldier within 5 miles of my colony, I won't just destroy your tanks. I'll walk into your headquarters and drop the roof on your head. Do you understand?" Vance coughed, clutching his throat. He looked at his destroyed mechs and his broken soldiers. "This isn't over, Lin. The hive mind is coming. When the city falls, you'll be the first to die in that little house of yours." "I've died once already," I said, turning my back on him. It wasn't that impressive. I walked away as the HRF began to retreat, their vehicles limping back toward the city center. I felt the weight of the infamy title growing heavier. I hadn't just defended the colony. I had humiliated the only remaining government force. As I made my way back, the blue light of the sovereign shelter appeared on the horizon, a beacon in the sea of red mist. But as I got closer, I saw Kale and Sarah standing at the gate, their faces grim. "Lin, we have a problem," Kale said, pointing toward the north. The red sky wasn't just pulsing anymore. It was tearing. A massive black rift, the largest I had ever seen, was opening directly over the city center. Thousands of spawn anchors were falling like rain, but they weren't hitting the outskirts. They were all landing in a circle around the hive mind. "The system is accelerating the integration," Kale whispered. "The hive mind isn't waiting for Wave 3. It's launching the final harvest tonight." I looked at the colony, the 5,000 people who were finally starting to hope. I looked at Maya, who was collapsed on the porch from exhaustion. I looked at my own hands, which were still smoking from Vance's sunbolt. "Sarah, get the survivors into the central complexes. Seal the basements. Kale, I want every turret, every trap, and every mana bomb we have armed and ready. Maya, I need you to wake up. We aren't just fighting for the block anymore." I looked at the rift, the black void screaming in the sky. "Tonight, we find out if the Sovereign can actually rule a world that's trying to delete him. Quest complete. The siege is broken. XP gained. Warning, the final harvest commences in 4 hours." I sat on the porch, sharpening the gravity piercer with a stone. The sound was the only thing I could hear in the sudden, terrifying silence of the city. We were ready as we could ever be. But as I looked at the countdown, I knew one thing for certain. By tomorrow morning, the city would belong to the monsters, or it would belong to me. There was no middle ground left. The 4-hour countdown felt less like a ticking clock and more like a tightening noose. Every second that passed, the red sky grew darker, the clouds swirling into a black vortex that seemed to be sucking the very oxygen out of the city. I stood on the roof of the Sovereign shelter, my eyes fixed on the horizon where the city center used to be. The skyscrapers were gone, replaced by a jagged mountain of pulsating flesh and obsidian, the hive mind's physical manifestation. It was an organic tower of nightmares, and it was finally ready to harvest. Down in the colony, the transformation was complete. The 5,000 survivors had moved with a silent, desperate efficiency. Sarah's teams had finished the secondary wall, a brutal structure of reinforced steel and mana conductors that now hummed with a low, protective frequency. Kale was in the basement, his body hooked up to the central core via a neural interface he'd jury-rigged from HRF Tech. He was no longer just monitoring the shield, he was the shield. His consciousness was spread across every sensor and turret in the 3-block radius. "Lynn, the atmospheric pressure is dropping," Kale's voice echoed in my head, a direct telepathic link from the core. "The system is creating a localized vacuum. It's a zero-zone event. If that rift opens any wider, it won't just drop monsters, it'll pull the atmosphere into the void. We have to finish this before the hive mind completes the bridge." I looked down at Maya. She was standing in the middle of the garden, her hands pressed against the ancient oak tree that served as the colony's spiritual anchor. She was pale, her nose bleeding from the strain, but the green light flowing from her was the only thing keeping the survivors from collapsing under the sheer weight of the dread aura emanating from the city center. "I can feel them, Lynn," she whispered, her voice carrying across the rooftops. "Millions of them. Not just hounds or trolls, something old, something that was here before humanity." System announcement. The final harvest has begun. Warning. Sovereign domain targeted as primary nutrient source. The sky didn't just tear, it exploded. Thousands of void sirens creatures that looked like skeletal angels with wings of black smoke poured out of the rift. They didn't dive. They fell like rain, screaming a frequency that shattered the windows of every house outside our shield. At the same time, the ground beneath the colony began to heave. This wasn't a single breach. The hive mind was sending its roots directly through the earth to bypass our walls. "Kale, internal defense. Now!" I roared. Massive fleshy tentacles, thick as redwood trees and covered in serrated teeth, burst through the asphalt of the community park. They weren't hunting people. They were lunging for the foundations of the apartment complexes. I leaped from the roof, the gravity piercer extending to its full 6-foot length, glowing with a sapphire light so bright it hurt to look at. Gravity anchor, 100-fold. I slammed into the first tentacle, the force of my impact creating a crater that shook the entire block. I didn't just cut it. I used the gravity well to twist the organic mass until it snapped like a dry twig. Black ichor sprayed across the park, sizzling as it hit the grass, but 10 more roots took its place. "Sarah, activate the floor grid," Kale's voice boomed over the colony's loudspeakers. Underneath the newly paved streets, the mana iron plates we had installed began to glow. A grid of high-voltage mana arcs snapped into existence, searing the hive mind's roots. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, a sickening stench that made the survivors in the basements gag. But the real threat was above. The void sirens were slamming into the level 4 shield, their smoking wings eating away at the blue light. For every 100 that Kale's turrets shot down, 1,000 more took their place. The shield was flickering, the blue light turning a sickly violet as the void siren's corruption took hold. Shield integrity, 42%, 38%, 31%. "Lynn, I can't hold the top and the bottom at the same time," Kale screamed. "The core is overheating. I need you to take out the anchor point." I looked at the sky. A massive, black obsidian spike had descended from the rift, hovering a mile above the colony. It was the gravity anchor of the hive mind, the physical tether that allowed the monsters to ignore our shield's repulsion. If I didn't destroy it, the shield wouldn't just crack, it would be deleted. "Maya, give me everything you have left," I yelled. Maya didn't hesitate. She poured her remaining spirit energy into a single, light path. A bridge of shimmering gold light formed from the park floor, stretching all the way up into the clouds. "Go, Lynn, don't look back." I sprinted up the light path, my boots barely touching the gold energy. As I ascended, the void sirens swarmed me, their smoke claws tearing at my hoodie and my skin. I didn't stop. I activated Sovereign's Fury, my mana pool burning in a controlled explosion. I reached the obsidian spike. It was massive, the size of a skyscraper, humming with a frequency that felt like it was trying to pull my soul out of my chest. Inside the glass-like surface, I could see the distorted faces of the people the hive mind had already harvested in the first timeline. "Not this time," I growled. I didn't use the spear for a simple thrust. I grabbed the anchor of the fallen chain and wrapped it around the obsidian spike. I planted my feet against the code light of the system and pulled. World weight, absolute singularity. I forced the gravity of the entire city to center on that single spike. The obsidian began to crack. The screams from within the pillar grew deafening. My own bones started to snap under the pressure of the technique, my health bar dropping into the critical red zone. "Lynn, the shield is gone." Kale's voice was a desperate rasp. Below me, the blue dome shattered into a million pieces. The void sirens began to dive into the colony, their black wings spreading like a funeral shroud over the 5,000 people I had sworn to protect. "No!" I roared. With a final, violent heave, I shattered the obsidian spike. It didn't just break, it exploded into a trillion shards of data. The tether snapped. The rift in the sky suddenly buckled, the vacuum reversing. The void sirens weren't just stopped, they were sucked back into the sky by the sudden change in pressure. But the hive mind wasn't done. In its death throes, the central tower in the city center released a corruption wave, a wall of red energy that moved across the landscape like a tsunami. It was designed to kill everything it touched. A final, "If I can't have it, no one can move by the system." I fell from the sky, my mana at 0/1000, my body broken. I watched the red wave, approaching the colony. Sarah, Kale, Maya, they were all standing in the park, looking at the impending death. "I won't let it end like this," I whispered, reaching into my inventory for the one item I had kept hidden since the very first day of the regression. The Sovereign's Heart. Sovereign's Heart. It was a small, golden orb that contained the soul of the first regressor me, from the timeline where I died. It was a one-time use item. It wouldn't give me power, it would give me a command. I crushed the orb in my hand as I plummeted toward the earth. Command accepted. Protect the bloodline. A dome of golden light, not blue, erupted from the center of the colony. It wasn't powered by the core or by Kale. It was powered by the sacrifice of my past self. The red wave hit the gold dome and broke, flowing around the colony like water around a rock. I hit the ground in the middle of the park, the impact cushioned by the last of the spirit vines. I lay there, looking up at the sky. The black rift was gone. The red sky was still there, but it was thinner, the crimson replaced by a pale, bruised purple. The final harvest was over. The colony was still standing. I felt Kale and Maya run toward me. I felt their hands on me, the warmth of Maya's healing light, and the relief in Kale's voice, but I couldn't move. I looked at the system screen one last time before the darkness took me. Warning: the system creators have noticed your interference. I closed my eyes. We had won the colony war. We had beaten the hive mind and humiliated General Vance. But as the survivors began to emerge from the basements, their faces tear-streaked and weary, I knew that the real enemy wasn't the monsters. It was the entities that were currently watching us from the rift, planning their next move. Let them watch, I thought as I drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. I'm not the coward who died in the ditch anymore. I'm the sovereign, and I'm coming for the throne. The darkness didn't last as long as I expected. In my first life, death was a cold, lingering void, a slow erasure of everything I was. But this time, the darkness was electric. It pulsed with the hum of a billion servers, the white noise of a universe being recalculated. I felt my consciousness being pulled through a needle's eye, my physical body stretching and compressing until the concept of up and down became meaningless. When my eyes finally snapped open, I wasn't in the park. I wasn't in the colony. I was standing in a place where the sky was made of liquid glass and the ground was a shimmering grid of violet light that stretched into infinity. Notification: dimensional transition successful. Location: the Interstitial Archive Sector 0. Status: unauthorized entity detected. I tried to breathe, but the air didn't enter my lungs. It entered my pores, tasting of copper and ancient dust. I looked down at my hands. They were translucent, flickering like a dying light bulb. I could see the blue mana veins of the sovereign title glowing beneath my skin, but they were being overwritten by thin, jagged lines of red code. The system wasn't just watching me anymore. It was trying to format me. I reached for the gravity piercer, but my hand passed right through the handle. The spear, my lifeline, was sitting 5 feet away on the grid, its physical matter vibrating so fast it looked like a blur of static. "Kale? Maya?" I called out. My voice didn't travel through the air. It appeared as scrolling text in the space in front of me, vibrating with a low, digital growl. "Lynn, don't move!" Kale's voice came from behind me, but it sounded distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I turned, slowly. My siblings were there, but they looked like ghosts trapped in a hall of mirrors. Kale was hunched over, his technomancer visor fused to his face, his fingers twitching as if he were typing on a keyboard only he could see. Maya was standing perfectly still, her white robes now glowing with a cold, pale light that lacked the warmth of the spirit garden. She was staring at the horizon, her eyes reflecting the spinning geometric shapes that floated in the distance. "Where are we, Kale?" I asked. I focused my will, forcing my hand to solidify. I gripped the gravity piercer, and this time, the weapon shrieked as our energies fused. The sapphire light of the spear fought back against the violet grid, creating a small circle of reality around us. "We're in the gut of the machine, Lynn," Kale said, his voice stabilizing as he tapped into the local network. "This isn't a rift dimension like the ones we saw on Earth. This is the archive. It's where the system stores the assets it harvests, the colony, the people, the city. To the creators, those aren't lives. They're just data points. And right now the archive is trying to compress us into a file." I looked at the horizon. In every direction, massive obsidian pillars rose into the glass sky. They were covered in glowing runes that scrolled upward at a dizzying speed. Each pillar was the size of a mountain, and as I watched, one of them flickered and vanished, replaced by a burst of white static. "That was a world," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "I can hear them. The spirits in that pillar. They were just deleted. Thousands of years of history, millions of souls, just gone because the archive needed the space for the next harvest. A sudden sharp chime echoed through the void, a sound so pure and cold it felt like a needle through the brain. Alert. Sanitization protocol initiated. Target: the variable Lynn Penhaligon. Purpose: removal of corrupted data. The violet grid beneath our feet began to ripple. From the shimmering lines, figures began to rise. They didn't have faces. They were humanoid shapes made of mirrors and shifting glass, their movements perfectly synchronized. They carried blades made of white light blades that didn't cut flesh, but erased the space they passed through. The erasers? I hissed. I stepped in front of Kale and Maya, the gravity piercer spinning in my hand. Kale, tell me you have a back door. Tell me we aren't just here to be deleted. I'm working on it, Kale screamed, his visor spraying sparks. I'm trying to spoof our IDs. I'm telling the system we're system maintenance drones, but the firewall here is sentient. It knows I'm lying. The first eraser moved. It didn't run. It simply glided across the grid, its form flickering between 2 points in space. It swung its light blade in a horizontal arc. I raised the spear to block, but the blade passed right through the shaft of my weapon. I felt a cold, numbing sensation in my chest as the tip of the light blade touched my translucent skin. System warning: data integrity at 98%. Reason: partial deletion detected. Gravity anchor. Absolute zero, I roared. I didn't just push the gravity, I pulled it from the archive itself. I forced the violet grid to collapse into a single point beneath the eraser's feet. The mirror man didn't fall, it shattered. Its body turned into a cloud of jagged data shards that were sucked into the floor. But for every one I destroyed, 10 more rose from the grid. They were emerging from the shadows of the obsidian pillars, an endless army of white light. Lynn, we can't fight them here, Maya cried out. She raised her hands, and a wall of spirit fire erupted around us, but the white blades of the erasers sliced through the fire as if it were nothing. This place doesn't follow the laws of spirits or mana. It's all logic and math. Then we change the math, I growled. I looked at the Sovereign's ledger that was now fused to my left forearm. The names of the 5,102 survivors were glowing with a fierce golden light. They were my anchors. As long as they lived in the colony, I had a tether to the physical world. I closed my eyes and reached out through the dimensional rift, back to the basement of the shelter. Kale, give me the frequency of the colony's core. What? Lynn, if you pull energy from the core now, the shield on Earth will collapse. The monsters will move back in. The monsters are gone, Kale. The creators are the only thing left. If we don't break out of this archive, there won't be a world to go back to. Give me the link. Kyle groaned, his face contorting in pain as he forced a connection through the interstitial space. Linking. Now. You have 30 seconds before the feedback fries the basement. A surge of raw, unrefined power hit me. It wasn't the cold, clinical energy of the archive. It was the warm, chaotic energy of humanity. The hope of the Millers, the determination of Sarah, the fear and the courage of 5,000 people. It flowed through the ledger and into my spear. The sapphire light of the gravity piercer turned a blinding, crystalline gold. Sovereign skill. Dimensional fracture. I didn't strike at the erasers. I struck at the sky. I drove the tip of the spear into the glass clouds, and for a heartbeat, everything stopped. The humming of the archive went silent. The erasers froze mid-stride. Then, the sky cracked. A massive, jagged hole tore open in the ceiling of the dimension, revealing a glimpse of the true rift beyond a chaotic sea of raw potential and unformed worlds. The vacuum created by the fracture began to suck the erasers upward, their mirror bodies spinning out of control as they were pulled into the void. Go! Move to the fracture! I yelled, grabbing Kale and Maya. We leaped from the violet grid, using the gravitational pull of the sky crack to propel ourselves. We flew past the obsidian pillars, and for a split second, I saw what was inside one of them. It wasn't just data. I saw faces. I saw cities. I saw a version of Earth where the sun was blue and the oceans were made of silver. Millions of failed integrations, stored away like old files in a cabinet. As we neared the fracture, a massive hand, made of the same obsidian as the pillars, reached out from the void to swat us down. It was the Overseer. Puny variable, a voice boomed, vibrating in the marrow of my bones. You seek transcendence, but you are merely a loop in a larger cycle. Return to the archive. The hand was the size of a city block, its fingers thick with scrolling red text. I felt my momentum stall. The gravity of the Overseer's hand was pulling us back toward the violet grid. I'm not a loop, I whispered, my eyes burning with the golden light of the 5,000 souls. I felt the Sovereign's heart. It gave me a final, hidden skill. Skill unlocked, the Architect's veto. I didn't fight the hand. I touched it. I placed my palm against the obsidian skin and injected the one thing the system couldn't account for. My memory of the first death. I showed the Overseer the cold ditch. I showed it the rain. I showed it the feeling of a life being stolen for no reason. The red text on the Overseer's hand began to turn blue. The obsidian cracked, the logic of the machine failing as it tried to process the pure, irrational weight of human grief. The hand shattered, and the shockwave sent us hurtling through the fracture and into the white light of the true rift. We tumbled through the void for what felt like years, though Kale later told me it was only seconds. When the light finally faded, we weren't in the archive anymore. We were standing on a floating island of white stone, surrounded by a sea of clouds that glowed with every color of the spectrum. Location, the rift dimensions, the first gateway. Status, survived the deletion protocol. Reward, Sovereign level 40. New quest, climb the God stairs. I sat up, my body finally feeling solid again. The air here was sweet, filled with the scent of wild grass and mountain rain. I looked at Kale and Maya. They were whole, their forms no longer flickering. Kale was already looking at a new, celestial interface that had appeared in the air, his eyes wide with wonder. Lin, look, Maya whispered, pointing ahead. At the end of our island, a set of stairs made of pure, solid light climbed into the higher reaches of the clouds. At the top of those stairs, I could see a city of white towers and golden domes, the home of the creators. They didn't expect us to make it out of the archive, I said, standing up and leaning on the gravity piercer. The spear was quiet now, its light steady and calm. They thought we were just data. Now, we're the virus that's standing at their front door. I looked back at the void where the archive was hidden. Somewhere down there, Earth was still struggling, the colony was still waiting, and the red sky was still pulsing. But for the first time in 2 lives, the system didn't feel like an unstoppable force of nature. It felt like a fortress with a cracked gate. Kale, can you still see the colony's status? Kale closed his eyes for a moment. It's faint, but the link is holding. Sarah has started the reconstruction. They're safe, Lynn. But the system is already preparing a correction wave to wipe the sector. We have to reach the spire and seize the Earth seed before that timer hits 0. I looked at the stairs. Then we don't wait. We've spent 40 days preparing. Now, we finish the story. The real war had just begun, and the gods were finally going to meet the man they couldn't delete. The white stone of the first gateway didn't just feel solid. It felt ancient, radiating a frequency that hummed against the soles of my boots. I looked back one last time at the shimmering fracture we had escaped from. The interstitial archive was a dark smudge against the kaleidoscopic clouds of the rift, a reminder of the thousands of worlds currently being processed into cold, dead data. But looking forward, the view was even more daunting. The stairs of light stretched upward for miles, winding through floating continents of crystal and fire, leading to the silver spire that dominated the zenith. That was the spire of origin, the throne room of the creators. Kale was hunched over his interface, his fingers moving through the air to stabilize our presence in this high-density dimension. Lin, the rules of physics here are completely different. The mana in the air is concentrated to a point where it's almost physical. If you swing your spear too hard, you might accidentally tear a hole in the island's fabric. We have to move carefully. We don't have time for carefully, Kale, I said, my voice echoing with a slight metallic resonance. My sovereign title was evolving in real time, adapting to the celestial environment. I could feel the 5,102 souls back on Earth pulling at me, their collective hope acting as a massive gravitational battery. The correction wave is already being calculated. If we don't reach the first checkpoint before the system sinks, the colony will be the first thing the creators delete to balance the equation. Maya walked to the edge of the island, her eyes wide as she watched a school of manna whales creatures made of pure starlight glide through the clouds below us. They aren't just creators, Lynn. They're gardeners, but they've forgotten that the flowers have thorns. She turned back to us, her expression hardening. The first gate is guarded, not by erasers, but by a fragment of the first, a being that existed before the system was even built. Notification. Divine Sentinel detected. Name. Astriel, the keeper of the threshold. A shadow fell over the island. From the clouds above, a figure descended. It wasn't a monster of flesh or a construct of data. Astriel was a being of pure, solidified light, standing 20 feet tall, with 6 wings that looked like solar flares. In its hand was a sword that burned with the heat of a dying star. Its face was a smooth, featureless surface of gold, but I could feel its gaze stripping away my secrets, my memories, and my very soul. You have breached the garden, variable. Astriel's voice didn't come through the air. It vibrated inside my DNA. You carry the stench of the lower world and the arrogance of a second life. Return to the ashes from which you came. I've had enough of being told where I belong, I said, stepping forward. I gripped the gravity piercer, and the sapphire light of the spear flared into a violent, chaotic purple. I'm not a variable anymore. I'm the debt collector, and the interest on my family's lives has just come due. The Sentinel didn't waste time with words. It swung the solar blade in a vertical arc. The heat was instantaneous. The white stone beneath my feet began to melt into glass. I used gravity leap to propel myself into the air, but the Sentinel's wings beat once, creating a gust of mana wind that slammed me back into the ground with the force of a falling mountain. Health, 82%. Warning, thermal damage detected. Lynn, Maya screamed. She slammed her hands into the melting stone, and a forest of emerald spirit vines erupted, weaving together to form a heat shield around us. The vines turned to ash in seconds, but it brought me the heartbeat I needed. Kale, the Sentinel's core, where is it? I yelled, my teeth gritted against the heat. It's not in the chest, it's in the wings, Kale shouted, his visor projecting a thermal map of the being. The wings are the heat sinks. If you can ground the wings, the body will overheat and destabilize. I looked at the 6 solar flares flapping above the Sentinel. This was a being that had never known gravity. It lived in the sky, free from the weight of the world. It was time to introduce it to the burden of being human. Sovereign skill. The chain of the fallen. I didn't lunge at the body. I threw the anchor of the fallen black chains into the air. They didn't fall. They snaked upward, guided by my mana. The chains wrapped around the Sentinel's uppermost wings. I roared, slamming the butt of my spear into the island. I forced the gravity of the entire floating continent to center on the Sentinel's wings. The being of light let out a sound like a shattering bell. Its massive form was jerked downward, the solar flares flickering as they were dragged toward the melting glass floor. Impossible, Astriel vibrated. The laws of the lower realms do not apply to the threshold. I am the law now, I countered. I sprinted up the length of the black chain, my boots smoking. I reached the Sentinel's head and drove the gravity piercer into the smooth gold mask. I didn't just stab it. I used Sovereign Siphon. I reached through the weapon and began to drain the Sentinel's light, feeding it directly into the ledger on my arm. The names of the survivors began to glow with a blinding brilliance as they were fortified by the energy of a divine being. Back on Earth, in the basement of the shelter, the core would be vibrating with enough power to last 1,000 years. The Sentinel's form began to dim, the solar flares turning into cold grey smoke. If you destroy me, the gate will close forever. Then I'll just have to break the door down, I replied. I twisted the spear, and the sentinel exploded in a silent burst of white mana. The shockwave cleared the clouds for miles, revealing the terrifying beauty of the higher rift. The white island beneath us shattered, but before we could fall, the stairs of light expanded, forming a solid bridge that led directly to the first gate. Quest complete. Defeat the sentinel. XP gained. Level up. 42. Sovereign ability evolved. Gravity Master. No longer requires mana for basic manipulation. I landed on the bridge, gasping for air. My hands were scorched, and my mana pool was flickering, but I felt a new sense of clarity. We had just killed a being that the system considered a god. The illusion of their invincibility was gone. Kale and Maya ran to me, Maya's healing light already working on my burns. Kale was staring at the gate, ahead a massive archway made of shifting constellations and liquid silver. Lin, when that sentinel died, it sent a signal. The spire is going into lockdown. They're moving the Earth Seed to the Eternal Forge at the top of the tower. If they forge it into a new world, the old Earth, our Earth, will be formatted instantly. How long do we have? I asked, looking at the silver gate. 90 minutes, Kale said, his voice flat. And there are 12 more gates between us and the forge. I looked at my siblings. They were tired, scared, and far from home. But their eyes were the same eyes they had in the basement 40 days ago, eyes that refused to give up. I looked at the gravity piercer. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a key. We don't need to clear 12 gates, I said, a dark plan forming in my mind. KL, you said the mana density here is high enough to tear the fabric of the islands, right? Yeah, but that would be suicide. You'd create a dimensional collapse. Not if I control the collapse, I said. We're going to use the gravity of the spire itself to slingshot us past the gates. We aren't going to climb the stairs, Kale. We're going to drop the spire to us. Maya looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. Lin, that's insane, even for you. The creators wanted a perfect system, I said, stepping onto the silver bridge. They wanted a world where everything is calculated and every variable is controlled. They forgot that the one thing you can't calculate is how much a man is willing to break to save his family. I raised the spear and pointed it at the silver gate. I didn't wait for a prompt or a mission. I initiated the sovereign's veto again, but this time I aimed it at the very architecture of the rift. Kale, Maya, hold on. We're about to skip a few chapters. I slammed the spear into the silver bridge, and the world began to tilt. The stairs didn't lead up anymore. The spire of origin began to lean toward us, the stars in the gate swirling into a violent, sapphire hurricane. System error, gravitational anomaly, detected. Warning, spatial collapse in progress. I smiled as the silver gate shattered under the pressure. We stepped into the hurricane, leaving the white islands behind, and hurtled toward the heart of the machine. The sensation of the slingshot wasn't like flying. It was like being the tip of a whip cracked by a giant. By anchoring my gravity to the spire of origin and collapsing the space in front of us, I had bypassed the physical distance of the next 10 gates, but the cost was our very stability. We were hurtling through a tunnel of white static and screaming data, the logic of the rift dimensions trying to tear us apart for breaking the sequence. I gripped the gravity piercer with both hands, my knuckles white, as I forced a sphere of absolute pressure around Kale and Maya. To the system, we were currently a high-velocity error, a corrupted packet of data moving too fast to be deleted. Lin, the friction. Kale's voice was a frantic burst of telepathic noise. The dimensional walls are grinding against the shield. We're going to hit the Eternal Forge at 10 times the terminal velocity. You have to slow us down, or we'll vaporize on impact. I can't slow down, I roared back, my vision blurring as the G-force threatened to pop the capillaries in my eyes. If I drop the anchor now, we'll be stranded in the empty sectors between gates. We have to hit the forge. We have to hit it hard. Maya was glowing, a brilliant, pulsating emerald that flickered every time the static touched her. She wasn't just healing us anymore. She was holding our souls together. The Earth Seed, she cried out. I can feel it! It's crying, Lin. It's being fed into the fire. A massive, ringing boom echoed through the void, the sound of a world-ending hammer hitting an anvil. The tunnel of static vanished, replaced by a blinding, white-hot chamber that felt like the heart of a star. This was the eternal forge. Below us, a river of liquid starlight flowed into a massive, rotating mold. In the center of that mold, suspended by chains of red code, was a pulsing, sapphire sphere the size of a house. The Earth Seed, our home, condensed into a single, fragile heart. Location, the Eternal Forge, the apex of origin. Status, forging initiated. Time to total format, 0 hours, 12 minutes, and 45 seconds. Brace yourselves. I slammed the butt of my spear into the air, creating a massive gravitational repulsion pulse just as we hit the floor of the forge. The impact cracked the obsidian tiles for 50 yards. I tumbled across the floor, my skin smoking, the sovereign armor shattered in dozen places. Kale and Maya were thrown in opposite directions, sliding across the burning glass. I coughed, tasting copper and ozone, and forced myself to my feet. The heat here was a physical weight, a pressure that felt like it was trying to melt my very thoughts. Standing over the river of starlight were the creators. They didn't look like gods. They looked like shadows cast against a wall of light tall, spindly figures with elongated limbs and heads that shifted between different geometric shapes. There were 3 of them, and as they looked at us, the air in the forge turned to liquid lead. They didn't speak with mouths. They spoke with the vibration of reality itself. The variable has arrived, the central creator vibrated. Its head was a rotating octahedron of obsidian. You have broken 12 universal constants to reach this point. You have expended the mana of 5,000 souls to defile the forge. Why? You know why, I said, leaning on my spear as my legs threatened to give out. My health was at a measly 12%, and my mana was a flickering 4/2,000. You treated my world like a draft. You treated my life like a footnote. I'm here to close the book. The Earth is an imperfect calculation, the second creator added, its head a shimmering sphere of mercury. It is riddled with entropy. We are reforging it into a higher state. The lives you protect are merely noise in the signal. By destroying the seed, we remove the noise. My sister isn't noise, I screamed. I didn't wait for my mana to refill. I reached into the Sovereign's ledger on my arm and did something I had never dared to try. I began to burn the names. System warning. Sovereign sacrifice initiated. Warning. Voluntary de-leveling in exchange for raw essence. Lin, no! What are you doing? Kyle shouted, scrambling to his feet. I'm giving the system what it wants, I replied, my voice booming with a power that wasn't mine. I sacrificed 10 levels in a single heartbeat. My level 42 status plummeted to 32, but the energy released by the deletion of that progress erupted from me in a pillar of golden fire. I wasn't just a regressor anymore. I was a supernova of human experience. I lunged at the central creator, the gravity piercer, moving so fast it left a wake of shattered space behind it. The octahedron head tilted. A wall of red code snapped into existence between us. I didn't try to break it. I used my architect's veto to simply erase the wall's existence. My spear went through the creator's chest, but there was no blood. There was only a spray of white sparks and the sound of 1,000 glass bells shattering. We are the system, the creator hissed, its form flickering. You cannot kill the logic that defines you. I'm not trying to kill you, I growled, twisting the spear. I'm trying to distract you. Now, Kale had reached the control pedestal for the red code chains. He wasn't typing anymore. He had plunged his entire arm into the liquid mana stream of the forge. His eyes were white, his skin turning into a translucent blue. Lin, I have the root access. I'm diverting the starlight. Maya, the seed, catch it. Maya sprinted toward the edge of the river. She jumped, her spirit vines erupting from her back like wings of emerald light. She grabbed the earth seed just as the red chains snapped. The moment her hands touched the sapphire sphere, the entire spire groaned. The forge began to tilt. Alert! Earthseed, removed from mold. Status: system collapse imminent. The three creators didn't panic. They simply merged together, their forms swirling into a massive, multifaceted entity that filled the entire chamber. If the seed is not forged, then the sector must be deleted. You have signed the death warrant of your species. A beam of pure white formatting light began to gather in the center of the fused creator. It was the same light that had erased the world in my first life. It was the bang that started everything, and now it was going to be the pop that ended us. Kale, get the seed to the gateway, I ordered, standing between my siblings and the gathering light. What about you? Maya cried out, clutching the pulsing sapphire heart to her chest. I'm the sovereign, I said, a calm washing over me that I hadn't felt in 2 lives. I looked at the gravity piercer. The weapon was cracked, its sapphire light fading, but it still felt heavy. It still felt like mine. A lord stays with his land. I'm going to hold the breach. When you get through the gate, use the seed to anchor the colony. If I'm not there, tell Sarah the walls need to be higher. Lynn, don't you dare. Kale reached for me, but I used a localized gravity pulse to shove them both toward the exit portal at the back of the forge. Go. That's an order. As they vanished into the portal, I turned back to the fused creator. The white light was blinding now, a roar that filled the universe. I planted my feet, the sovereign ledger glowing one last time as it recorded my final entry. Final log. I am Lynn Penhaligon. I have lived twice. I have loved a sister and a brother. I have built a home in the ashes, and I refuse to be deleted. I raised the gravity piercer and channeled the very last of my life force into a single point. I wasn't using gravity to push or pull anymore. I was using it to hold. I became the anchor for the entire dimension. The white light hit me. It didn't hurt. It felt like being washed in a cold, silent river. I saw the faces of the 5,102 survivors. I saw the blue light of the shelter. I saw the red sky of Earth turning back to a deep, beautiful blue. I saw the future I had bought with my second life. The spire of origin exploded. The forge vanished. The rift dimensions began to fold in on themselves. The creators, screaming as their logic was overwritten by the raw, chaotic will of a man who wouldn't die. I was floating in the white void, my body gone, my mana gone. Only my soul remained, a tiny, sapphire spark in the darkness. I expected the end, but then a hand reached into the void, a hand with calloused fingers and a familiar mana signature. Gotcha, you idiot. It was Kale, and behind him, the glowing, emerald light of Maya. They hadn't left. They had used the Earth Seed to create a recovery loop. They were pulling me back. Notification: Sovereign recovered. Status: Regression protocol completed. World status: Integration reversed. The red sky is gone. I felt the ground hit my back. It wasn't obsidian. It wasn't glass. It was cool, damp grass. I smelled rain. I heard a bird chirp in the distance, a real bird, not a monster. I opened my eyes. We were back in the park. The blue shield was gone because we didn't need it anymore. The red sky was replaced by the first light of a real dawn. The 5,102 survivors were standing in the street, looking up at a sun that didn't burn with mana. I looked at Kale and Maya. They were exhausted, covered in rift dust, but they were smiling. Kale's visor was off, showing eyes that were finally at peace. Maya was holding a handful of real dirt, tears streaming down her face. I looked at the gravity piercer. It was a simple, rusted iron spear again. No glow. No system prompts. No levels. I sat up and took a deep breath of the clean air. I looked at my house, the sovereign shelter, which was now just a big, sturdy home for a family that had survived the impossible. So, I said, my voice finally sounding like my own again, what's for breakfast?